Just imagine that there's potentially a predator in your community. Women are going missing left and right. Some have actually been found murdered. And you try to go to the police, and the police look at you silly. The first thing I want us to do, can we pop up that order from the Missouri governor, please, Colin? Because I want to put some of this into context before we get into the nuts and bolts of the story. And I'm going to try to make this quick. So, over the summer in June, it was that Governor Parson of Missouri signed into law SB 678, Senate Bill 678. And this bill specifically addresses funding for the Kansas City Police Department. And what it does legally, now it is codified into Missouri law, okay, that 25% of the city's general revenue per fiscal year is going to be spent on policing. Did you hear that, everybody? On a city of roughly 450,000 people, a quarter of their budget will be spent exclusively on policing. So keep that in mind. So the Kansas City Police Department's operating budget, and when we get our guest on, they could correct me if I have this mistaken, but it's approximately $270 million a year. $270 million a year for a city of 450,000, okay? So let's put this in context, okay? Weeks ago, a couple of months ago, community leaders, clergy, residents, everyday people that live in this area have been complaining to the police about missing and murdered women and wondering if the police were going to do anything about it. As I mentioned, community members have been making this call about these missing and murdered Black women. And on October 7th, 10 days ago, the morning of, in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, which is a small suburb just literally right outside of Kansas City, neighbors were awakened by a 22-year-old woman pleading for help. She was dressed in what appeared to be a bondage outfit of Black latex. She had ligature marks around her wrist. She had a dog collar around her neck, and she was terrified. She told the neighbors that she had been kidnapped a month prior. She had been repeatedly sexually assaulted, and she made the claims to police that two of her friends didn't make it. Okay. And since then, police have arrested Timothy Haslett, 39 years old, of Excelsior Springs, and charged him with, among other things, kidnapping and rape. And I'm joined today. I want to bring in our guest. We are joined with the founder and executive editor of the Kansas City Defender, which is an independent digital Black media outlet, Ryan Sorrel, who has been integral and on the forefront amongst other voices there in Kansas City to try to bring attention to the community's concerns about a potential serial killer stalking Black women there. And Ryan, I appreciate you making some time to join me today. Thank you so much for being on Status Coup.
Absolutely. I appreciate you inviting me on.
So, Ryan, and initially how I came to your reporting was through the Jezebel piece, right? And I want to give Jezebel some credit here because they attribute the Kansas City Defender reporting extensively throughout the piece. And I know sometimes in bigger mainstream outlets will outright steal the work of smaller outlets. So I appreciate Jezebel giving us proper attribution and credit to the work that you and your staff have done there in Kansas City. So talk to me about the weeks leading up to October 7th, before the young woman was able to escape her captor. What have you and other voices in Kansas City been trying to raise the alarm about these missing and murdered women? And about approximately about how many missing and murdered women are we talking about?
Absolutely. And to answer your first question, we unfortunately don't know, because oftentimes the women who are preyed upon are those who are most vulnerable. Oftentimes they don't have families who can formally file missing persons reports to the police department. And so really we don't know how many young women are missing, and that's part of the problem. But just to kind of go back to the initial question of what was taking place in the weeks leading up to this horrific revelation, I think it requires some context of how the Kansas City Police Department operates, some context of how the Kansas City Police Department views us as a Black news organization, how they view the Black community. And quite frankly, number one, the Kansas City Police Department is currently under federal investigation for racism and discrimination. They have a long and documented history of brutalizing and, quite frankly, inflicting racial terror on our communities. And so that's the type of relationship that the Kansas City Police Department has with Black people in our city. And so when we first started raising the alarm of missing and potentially murdered Black women, specifically from a street here in Kansas City called Prospect Avenue, those reports first started coming to us, I would say at around maybe September 23rd, September 22nd, possibly mid-September, just speaking generally. And we spoke to a man named Bishop Caldwell. We also spoke to a number of other community members who were saying that Black women were going missing from this particular street called Prospect Avenue. So we republished, we reposted that video, the one that you mentioned earlier. And we also provided a disclaimer saying, just because we were still doing additional investigation, but given the severity of this issue and given the fact we also don't find the police department to be the arbiters of truth, we don't think the police department really have the best interests of the Black community in mind. So we don't feel like we can go to them in these types of scenarios. And so we said, this is information we have been receiving from a number of people in the community that people are potentially missing from this particular area, that women are potentially being killed. And as soon as we get additional information, we will update you all. So we're very transparent in our processes and our reporting. And I'll go ahead. Were you going to ask a question?
Oh, no. Continue, okay. Honey. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. And so that was what our initial reports were. And of course, directly, 3 days, we reported that on a Friday, and it kind of blew up over the weekend. And by that upcoming Monday, the police department issued a statement saying unequivocally that what we reported on and what community members had been, issuing the testimonials and reports that people in the community were giving, that people were missing. The police department issued a statement that called these rumors, first off. And secondly, they said they were completely unfounded rumors. And they issued this statement without reaching out to us to figure out, where did we get this information from? They did not reach out to anyone in the community to figure out why were people in the community saying this? They essentially, in essence, what they wanted to do was to discredit us as a Black news outlet. And they also in essence, were silencing Black people in the community and Black women specifically in the community who were issuing these claims and reports and testimonials. And so that was incredibly problematic and disturbing to us. And secondarily, what took place after the police department issued that statement was all of the white media outlets in our city piled on. And they, oftentimes I consider it to be standard white journalistic practice to unquestioningly parrot what the police department says. And so that's exactly what they did. They did not, the white news outlets in our city did not do any investigation whatsoever, looking into what the police department said to verify it, if it was true or not. They printed it, and essentially everybody was trying to discredit us as a news outlet, and everybody was also, once again, silencing what people in our community were saying. And of course, now we find out, very unfortunately, in this horrific tragedy, a month later, that this young Black woman, 22-year-old Black woman, was picked up off of this exact same street that we said people were going missing from, at the exact same time period that we said that people were going missing. And she also said that 2 of her friends did not make it out and had also been murdered by this exact same man, Timothy Hazlitt Jr. And the police department, I actually reached out to the police department before we published our latest, reporting on this piece and making that connection. And the police department said they maintain, I asked them specifically, I said, given the fact this woman is from the exact area we said at the exact same time, do you all maintain that what we reported initially was completely unfounded? And I even said, I could understand if you said you don't have any evidence to support these claims, or if you said something like, we don't have any missing persons reports to support these claims, but we're willing to look into it. I can understand that. But to say that they're completely unfounded without doing any type of investigation whatsoever, that's what we found to be disturbing and anti-Black. We find that to be part of the legacy of white supremacist policing in our city that does not care about Black lives. And so that was the largest problem that we saw. And now I think a lot of people in our city are outraged, not only with the police department, but also with how the media was complicit. The white media outlets were complicit in the silencing of Black people in our community. And now, this is where we are at. And because of the fact that they did not listen, a month ago, this young woman was being tortured in a basement for a month. She actually told her neighbors once she escaped, she told them that she thought she was down there for 2 years, because that's the type of psychological trauma that she endured. And now we also don't know, is there a potential, if people were to take action on this at the time that we first raised these alarms, there's a potential that those other 2 women that this young lady said had been killed, there's a potential that they could have been rescued. But now, of course, that's not a possibility. So it's just overall, the entire situation is just absolutely horrific and tragic and terrible.
I want us to focus. I will ask you about the additional reporting that you found out about this alleged kidnapper and raper. I have to say alleged because we journalists here, you know what I'm saying, Timothy Haslett. But this man who has been charged with these crimes in connection to violating this 22-year-old woman. But I want us to talk about and continue about the mainstream media coverage and the ways in which you accurately state that mainstream media outlets operate as propaganda outlets. They are there to do the police say journalism, officials say, authorities say, without asking or trying to gain information from other sources. They rely exclusively about what the police say. And if you could pop up that Kansas City Star piece for me there, Colin, because this piece is very emblematic of that. But what the interesting part about this piece posted by the Kansas City Star, and the headline there reads, it says, Excelsior Springs kidnapping case not linked to Kansas City missing persons cases, police say. And there's a video here, and I didn't pull the video because the video is only 45 seconds long, but the video cuts out at a very interesting point. So it's interviewing, obviously, a police spokesperson, giving the media updates about the latest status of the investigation, which, by the way, police seeming to be not releasing a lot of details. But right when the clip cuts off at about 45 seconds, the cop is in the middle of saying that there was a cadaver dog brought out to the home, but at this time, we can't say what the findings were. And I find that a really interesting, weird way to say that, because I feel as though in order to discredit the story that you have reported upon and other members in the community have been trying to raise the alarms to police about, had there not been any cadaver material, I think they would have said that. I think they would have just come out and said, we didn't find any cadaver material. But the fact that they're not saying yes or no leads me to believe that it's yes. So the ways in which the media has just been willing to just go along with the cop narrative, something that you touched upon here. But how does this play out to the ways in which the Kansas City police interact and engage with the Black community there in Kansas City generally? And by the way, Kansas City has a very significant Black population, so it's lots of Black folks there. How are Black people in the community generally treated, in addition to this apathy and indifference shown in the case of these missing and murdered women?
I love that question, because that's the reason that I got into journalism, is because of how angry I was with how our local media outlets would just unquestioningly, every single time. And there's so many situations, I'll name off a few in a bit, but so many situations where the police department has been caught flat out lying, and our local media outlets just printed it and, never apologized for it. And, they made their little updates, but they have certainly not repaired the harm that they have caused by spreading these state sanctioned lies. And so, to me, that's just the number one problem here, is that even in that article that you just showed, really that's misdirection, because they're saying missing persons not connected to the case in Excelsior Springs. the woman who was found in Excelsior Springs who escaped was not in the missing persons database from Kansas City. And so we as a community said that people were missing, and we raised the alarm. And rather than looking into it or investigating it or doing any type of due diligence whatsoever, the police department simply said, well, that's not in our database, so we basically don't care. That's essentially what their response was. And so even now, after we have evidence that even though someone was not in their database, they still were missing, the police department is not willing to, rethink their practice. And so this news article that the Kansas City Star just published saying that it's not connected because it's not the missing person database, that's literally just a misdirection piece to try to bring, all this attention away from the Kansas City Police Department to try to give them back some type of credibility. I don't think that's going to happen by any means. Secondly, to give some background to the question that you asked around what is the relationship like for the Kansas City Police Department and the media, the Black community here. One example that I give every single time I talk, just because I think it is so symbolic of how the local media outlets are complicit in the brutalization, dehumanization, and actual murder of Black people in our city by the police department. One example I give is in March of last year, a man named Malcolm Johnson was killed. He was murdered by the Kansas City Police Department in a gas station here in Kansas City. And as soon as that happened, the Kansas City Police Department issued an official report that said that he was armed. It said that he was engaged in a shootout with the police department. And so in essence, what that did was that would justify the fact that they killed him, of course. And without questioning that narrative, without being skeptical in any way whatsoever, all of the local news outlets in our city, once again, unquestioningly parroted exactly what the police said in their official police report. And they said, armed man engaged in a shootout with the police department dies. And so, of course, anybody who reads that type of article is like, well, he deserved it. And they go on about their day. And come to find out, a month after that took place, some employees at that gas station actually leaked surveillance footage from the incident that took place. And we find out not only was he unarmed, but that he was actually being held on the ground by 3 police officers. And one of the police officers accidentally shot another police officer and then murdered Malcolm. And of course, we would have never known this information if those employees of that gas station did not leak it. This is only one example of many. There are so many documented examples, even just last year, in the case of a police officer named Eric DeValcanier, who murdered a Black man here named Cameron Lamb. It was proven in the courtroom. The attorney for that case was Lee Merritt, who also represented Ahmaud Arbery. It was proven in the courtroom that the Kansas City Police Department planted a weapon on the crime scene in order to try to make it look like Cameron Lamb was armed. And the court literally said that. And in that case, our chief of police said that he believes every single police officer would handle that situation exactly how that officer did. And so that will give you some context, hopefully, to how anti-Black, how racist, how discriminatory, how violent, how problematic our police department in our city is.
Ryan, we have about 2 minutes left. I know the KC Defender has done some additional reporting about the man now arrested and charged with the kidnapping and rape of the 22-year-old woman who was able to break free quickly. Could you give us the latest about what you all found on his social media postings and basically his political ideology? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the short of it is that he's a white supremacist. He said things like, we're in a race war. He said some violent things about Breonna Taylor and that she deserved to die. He also said things like, when Black people start to act like equals, then I'll treat them as such. So very clearly, a white supremacist, someone who is very motivated by white supremacist ideologies. And it's clear that that is also what motivated him to do the things that he did. So very, very horrific again.
Well, listen, Ryan, the Kansas City Defender is the credible source on this story. Kansas City media outlets, newspapers, television stations have rendered themselves not credible because they will repeat the police version of things, chapter and verse. So we appreciate you being an independent voice and standing up for the voiceless, the people, the Black people, specifically in Kansas City, Missouri, and the Black women there who have been targeted by what appears to be a serial predator. I can't rely on anything that the Kansas City police say. So at least I know that with confidence that there is at least the KC defender out there that is willing to push the police, ask the very difficult questions that other media outlets are obviously very afraid to ask for whatever reason. So I appreciate you guys bringing very honest and very clear and community focused journalism in the interest of public safety out here for women in your community. So I thank you very much for your work.
Yeah, I appreciate that greatly. And I would just want to say that one of the only, things that I am optimistic about is that we are organizing on the ground now to create our own database of missing persons and to be able to create our own public safety infrastructure so that we don't have to rely on the police department, because it's very clear that they have no capability whatsoever of being able to provide safety for us. So we are going to start doing that for ourselves.